When I first started comparing Agatha Christie adaptations to the books they were based on, I actively avoided Death on the Nile because at the time, everyone was talking about it, thanks to the new Kenneth Branagh film. I did mention the previous two adaptations in my video about the 10 best Poirot movies. In my opinion, the David Suchet rendition is objectively the better version, though my personal preference is for the Peter Ustinov. Death on the Nile is Christie's longest mystery novel, with a whopping 16 suspects, so of course each adaptation has made a fair amount of changes and deletions. Now, it's easy to say that the Branagh version deviated most from the original story, but that's not necessarily why it failed as an adaptation. The book begins in England, where heiress Lynette Ridgway is approached by her best friend Jacqueline de Belfort, who wants Lynette to give her fiancé, Simon Doyle, a job. Before we know it, Lynette and Simon are married and enjoying their honeymoon in Egypt, or they would be enjoying it if not for Jackie, who's stalking them. Hercule Poirot also happens to be vacationing in Egypt, and by coincidence he remembers seeing Jackie and Simon in a London restaurant. Lynette attempts to hire him to intercede on her behalf, but Poirot declines, though he does speak to Jackie and tells her to
bury your dead, mademoiselle.
I say bury the dead. Not as the Egyptians do, properly, finally. Turn your back on the past.
Jackie talks about wanting to murder Lynette, and perhaps someone overhears. Lynette and Simon attempt to hoodwink Jackie, concealing their plans to sail down the Nile River. Other passengers on the boat voyage include Louise Bourget, Lynette's maid, Andrew Pennington, Lynette's American trustee who just happened to bump into her, James Fanthorpe, who's secretly an agent of Lynette's English lawyers, Tim Allerton, a friend of Lynette's, Mrs. Allerton, Tim's mother, Salome Otterborn, a once popular romance novelist, Rosalie, her sulky daughter, Miss Van Schuyler, an American aristocrat, Miss Bowers, her nurse, Cornelia Robeson, Miss Van Schuyler's young cousin, Mr. Ferguson, an outspoken communist, Guido Richetti, an Italian archaeologist, Dr. Bessner, a German physician, Mr. Fleetwood, an engineer, and, of course, Hercule Poirot. The Carnac sets off on its voyage, and for a moment all seems well. And then...
Darling! I thought you were staying at the hotel. Well, what a hoot.
The 1978 adaptation had a decent screenplay by Anthony Shaffer, but its real strength is in its star power. Mia Farrow kills it, no pun intended, as Jackie. Angela Lansbury steals every scene she's in, and while Bowers and Van Schuyler have an unremarkable relationship in the book, Maggie Smith and Bette Davis turn it into a cinematic treasure.
Keep a civil tongue in your head, Bowers, or you'll be out of a job.
What do I care?
In terms of plot changes, David Niven is introduced early as Colonel Race. Jackie's ominous crashing of the sea voyage is postponed, but is no less chilling, and the restaurant scene is replaced by Jackie and Simon driving. Jackie is so enamored with Simon she nearly gets them killed, which is not only good foreshadowing, it's a creative way to show what Poirot observed. "She cares for him too much, that little one," he said to himself. "It is not safe. No, it is not safe." For the 2004 TV film, screenwriter Kevin Elliott was evidently determined to squeeze as much of the original story as he could into a 90-minute runtime, a Herculean task for which I applaud him. However, one inevitable side effect is that the pace of this film is really rushed. On the upside, we're treated to some scenes that were skipped in the previous film, like where Poirot calls out Lynette for betraying her friend. We'll talk about this some more in a minute. I have some things to say about Lynette's portrayal. Both films do a superb job of building the relationship between Poirot and Jackie, but I want to highlight the scene between David Suchet and Emma Mullen. It's so good, even with the limited time span. Much of the dialogue is straight from the book, though one change in particular made it all the more powerful, a moment when Jackie breaks character and says something genuine.
To put my gun against her head, pull the trigger. Oh God, I'm so afraid.
For 2022, I'm not going to go over every change and addition that screenwriter Michael Green made to the story. I'm sure that's been covered by plenty of other YouTubers. But I do want to draw attention to some particular changes that affected the story most fundamentally. The book does describe Jackie and Simon dancing. two bodies that moved in perfect rhythm of happiness, happiness in the place, the hour, and in each other. The film takes this description and goes a bit overboard. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with dance porn, but it does become a problem when it crowds out character development. A story is built on relationships, not spectacle or expression alone, and that's all this is. Colorful choreography is no match for sharp and nuanced dialogue. Rather than being strangers to each other, the passengers on the Karnak are all part of the wedding party, there to join Simon and Lynette for their honeymoon. Has this ever been a thing? For anyone? Ever? Kenneth Branagh can never be faulted as a director for his scenery shots. I mean, my goodness. But the cinematography is undercut by the characters, who are really not characters at all, but caricatures. We'll go over each one of them in just a little bit. The only thing I'll mention for now is that unlike its predecessors, 2022 provides little to no chemistry between Jackie and Poirot, though there is something between Poirot and Lynette, who is portrayed much more sympathetically here than anywhere else. In the book, Poirot tells Jackie he's sorry for her now that she's here.
You're cutting the last bonds which bind you to safety. You can still turn back if you really want to.
One must follow one's star wherever it leads.
The passengers start getting to know one another, and eventually they reach the temple of Abu Simbel. While touring the temple, Simon and Lynette narrowly escape being crushed by a falling boulder. Simon assumes it was pushed over by Jackie, and he's furious, but she was elsewhere. Could it have been an accident? Poirot is surprised when another passenger joins the voyage, his old friend, Colonel Race. Race confides that he's here undercover, on the trail of a paid agitator and serial murderer. In turn, Poirot confides to Race his growing anxiety, his sense of impending catastrophe. Jackie, meanwhile, has begun complaining that Simon and Lynette don't seem to mind her presence anymore, so she's no longer able to hurt them. One night, after most everyone has gone to bed, Jackie works herself into a rage and shoots at Simon. The only witness is Cornelia. She and Fanthorpe help a hysterical Jackie who speaks remorsefully and professes a wish to commit suicide. Once she's under the care of Miss Bowers, they assist Dr. Bessner in tending to Simon's leg wound. Later, Fanthorpe goes to retrieve the pistol which Jackie dropped, but he reports that it's disappeared. In the morning, Lynette is found shot through the head. 1978 makes the beginning of the voyage a little formulaic, giving each suspect a distinct motive, even if such didn't exist in the book. In Miss Bowers' case, her motive is the same as Cornelia's, though in the book its revelation was delayed so it could be a twist. The coincidence that all the other passengers have motives to kill Lynette is just as implausible as Poirot always being near enough to eavesdrop on these confrontations, though rather than try to make it plausible, the film turns it into a running gag. Since Fanthorpe and Cornelia are absent from this film, it's Ferguson and Rosalie who witness Jackie shooting Simon. I like that Ferguson is given Fanthorpe's characteristic aversion to blood. That, combined with his militant rhetoric, gives him a certain amount of irony. Ferguson also replaces Fanthorpe for this scene in the 2004 version. This adds humor as, when Jackie, prior to shooting the gun, pretends to be interested in Cornelia's life story, Ferguson pretends just as fervently, only for a different reason. He's smitten with her. I was surprised to find more familiarity in the middle of the 2022 film. There's a scene in the book that each film dramatizes, in which Pennington tries to get Lynette to sign some documents without reading them. Simon encourages it, as he never reads any documents before signing, and then Fanthorpe reinforces Lynette's customary caution, whereupon Pennington snatches the documents away. In 1978, Colonel Race takes over Fanthorpe's function, as he's here to keep Pennington from swindling Lynette. But in 2022, it's Rosalie who catches on to the situation and saves Lynette from being cheated. Leading to the boulder falling at Abu Simbel, the film follows the pattern of its predecessor by reshaping the story to be Poirot-centric. He seems to be developing feelings for Mrs. Otterbourne, and I did appreciate that while making awkward conversation with her, he makes a reference to the murder of Roger Ackroyd. Later, when speaking to Jackie, he drops the tragic backstory of how his old flame was killed during World War I, for which he blames himself. This, of course, is not canon. Lynette's brush with death is given more flavor by the fact that she and Simon were just about to have sex on a historical landmark, because why not? And by a sudden sandstorm, which you'd think would have some effect on the plot, but no. Jackie's reintroduction feels abrupt, and Simon and Lynette decide to cut their honeymoon short and go home the next day, which actually works in terms of the plot because it's a sensible choice and it gives Jackie a reason to feel powerless to hurt them anymore. It's Book and Rosalie who witness Jackie shooting Simon, and while we're not told that the gun has gone missing, we do see something sinking to the riverbed beneath the boat. Let's take a quick look at the variations on the characters. We'll start with Andrew Pennington, played by George Kennedy in 1978 and David Soul in 2004. Pennington functions in the book as a major red herring, so while both actors gave great performances, 1978's rendition was better written. For instance, he's given more of a chance to show us his thought process when he sees how feckless Simon is. 2022's version, played by Ali Fazal, gave the character some sort of backstory in which he and Lynette grew up together, but his function and motivation are basically the same. Although we're not treated in any of the films to the full sequence of events in which Rosalie bonds with Poirot, like in the beginning when he encourages her to do some healthy venting, Zoe Telford captures the character perfectly in 2004. Olivia Hussey's version spends more time defending her mother than resenting her. Rather than simple jealousy, this Rosalie's motive is that Lynette is suing her mother for libel. Speaking of Mrs. Otterbourne, Frances de la Tour gives us the most book-accurate portrayal, but I'll take Angela Lansbury hamming it up any day.
I've had a bet with my daughter here that you're Hercules Porridge, the famous French sleuth.
Not quite. I'm Hercule Poirot, the famous Belgian sleuth.
In 2022, Rosalie and Salome are niece and aunt, as well as American jazz musicians, as part of an entirely new subplot, which I'll touch on later. Tim Allerton only appears in the 2004 film, and while his character is more entertaining than he was in the book, he's a lot less likable. The same can more or less be said of his mother, though both of them retain a lot of their book dialogue. Their relationship in the film is a little weird. Again, entertaining, but in the end it leads to a disappointing payoff. In 2022, Tim seems to have been replaced by the character Book from the previous film, and if his mother is the equivalent of Mrs. Allerton, then she's had a complete dick makeover. Apart from being good friends with Poirot, Book and Tim are not too dissimilar in character. Early in the film, Book's function seems to be merely exposition. Unlike 1978, 2004's Ferguson gets to have his whole character arc play out. Again, impressive given 2004's shorter runtime. Believe it or not, both films toned him down considerably. He was way more vocal and annoying in the book. 2022 left Ferguson out, or did it? It's difficult to say whether 1978's or 2004's version of Miss Van Skyler is closer to the original. Both of them are bossy and mean, but while for one of them it makes her rather villainous, for the other it makes us kind of root for her. All three films have her accompanied by either Cornelia or Miss Bowers, and in each case the companion has Cornelia's motive from the book. In the case of 2022, Bowers also has a romantic relationship with Miss Van Skyler, who, bizarrely, seems to have had her character combined with that of Ferguson, of all people. She's still a rich lady, but now she's spouting communist rhetoric. It's probably supposed to be funny, but really it's just perplexing. While Jack Warden's rendition of Dr. Bessner is of course more fun, 2004 once again has the more accurate portrayal, as, like Ferguson, his character arc plays out to completion. In 2022, he's combined with Count Windlesham, who in the book proposed to Lynette and was turned down, and was not present for the voyage on the Nile. So we end up with Dr. Windlesham, played by Russell Brand. Louise appears in all three films, and unlike in the book, has a similar motive in each. In 2022, Louise resents Lynette for ruining her engagement. In 1978, Louise is given the backstory of another book character who doesn't figure prominently, and is after a dowry so she can get married. 1978 embellishes it by making her wannabe husband Egyptian. Now, in the book, by coincidence, the wannabe husband is actually on the Karnak. He's Fleetwood, the engineer. Fleetwood doesn't appear in any film, but when I saw the Ustinov movie for the first time, before reading the book, I suspected this guy of being Louise's intended. 2004's Louise wants money from Lynette so she can bail someone out of jail. With 1978 making use of Colonel Race for comic relief, you might think that James Fox's portrayal is closer to the book. But surprisingly, I find David Niven's to be more accurate, at least in terms of personality. Fox is just a tad too jolly and flippant, and even though Niven ends up being the butt of several jokes, he still carries himself like a professional. Friendly if he can be, deadly if he needs to be. Like most Poirot fans, I see David Suchet's as the definitive portrayal of Poirot, and Death on the Nile is no exception. However, Peter Ustinov's performance should by no means be discounted. Not only is he an acting powerhouse, but he lets us see aspects of Poirot's character that 2004 is too rushed to take the time for, like the way he gently prattles.
No, this way's better. Oh, no, there's a beastly step here which I always trip on. No, that's the river.
Branagh's Poirot, I admit, felt slightly more genuine in this film, at least to start with, than in Orient Express, mostly in how he spends time watching the characters who are story-centric rather than being so. Sadly, these moments are undercut by all sorts of other things that run counter to Poirot's personality. But those things are not what I really want to talk about. I want to talk about the deviations not from Poirot's character, but from those of Simon, Jackie, and Lynette. Interestingly, while 2004's Simon has more book-accurate dialogue, 1978's Simon feels closer to the original in terms of personality. He comes off much more as a likable idiot. 2022's Simon doesn't seem to have much personality at all, except when he suddenly starts being mean to Jackie, which is out of character for him. Of course, in the end it turns out this confrontation was staged, so maybe this was a melodramatic slip-up on Simon's part, which would be characteristic of him. Except, in the book, there's a moment when Jackie almost gives herself away by saying Simon loves her even now, but then she covers by saying, "No, now I think he hates me." 2004 includes this moment, but it's too subtle to catch. In 2022, Jackie insists that Simon does still love her, making Simon's later declaration that he hates her apparently what pushes her over the edge. That means that his behaving out of character was part of the plan, making it a mistake on Jackie's part, and that is a problem. Speaking of Jackie, I should mention one writing choice in 2004 that puzzled me. In the book, Jackie is careful to tell Poirot that Simon married Lynette not for her wealth, but for her glamour, and how it made him feel to be her choice when she could have chosen anyone. In the film,
One of the richest women in England. No wonder it went to his head.
this seems like a needlessly risky move on her part, but otherwise the character is translated really well in this film, and in 1978. I especially like the haunting moment when Jackie passes Poirot on her way to enact the shooting scene, and for a moment her fear shows through. This added backstory is film only, and it irritates me because Christie wrote Jackie and Lynette as genuinely good friends. Lynette's betrayal hurt because it came as a shock. If Lynette now has a history of taking things from Jackie, just like from everyone else, then her taking Simon is made meaningless. It was an unnecessary addition that weakened both the plot and Jackie's character strength. If this had actually happened, I have no doubt that Jackie would have called off the plan. In fact, in the book, she nearly did. Lynette unhesitatingly and uncaringly attempting to steal Simon away is what justified the decision in Jackie's mind. If Lynette had shown even an iota of genuine kindness or remorse, it might have saved her life. So, Lynette. Much like with Jackie, 1978 and 2004 have slightly different interpretations of Lynette, but they both capture her core characteristics. She's direct, businesslike, privileged, and entitled in a way that's not cliché. She doesn't want things her way in spite of what's right. In her mind, she wants things her way because her way is right. It must be. That's why it's so silly of people to get angry with her. Don't they see she's trying to help? Can't they see how generous she's being? Why aren't they grateful to her? She hasn't a clue what true kindness looks like, either on the giving or the receiving end. When Hercule Poirot, one of the smartest men in the world, refuses to help her, she's flabbergasted. It's incomprehensible. And yet some of what he says rings true for her. A part of her she'd rather not acknowledge feels guilty for having hurt Jackie, the part of her that's most human. That part could have saved her if she'd listened to it. She's just as much a tragic character as Simon and Jackie. Well, maybe not Simon. 2022 transforms Lynette into a likable, relatable person, someone we want to be or be like, and it completely robs her as a character. It's good that she doesn't have any guilt to bury anymore, because she's so lacking in depth there's nowhere to bury it. There are two moments that echo her book origins. One when she says, and another when she allows Simon to dissuade her from changing their plans, for fear of hurting his feelings. The rest is all damsel in distress, and her relationship with Poirot is not nearly as compelling as the one that it crowded out. She's no longer in the story because she's important. She's in the story because she's important in relation to Poirot. Even with all the other changes, if they'd just gotten the central characters right, maybe, just maybe, this might have been a decent adaptation. Where were we? A letter J written on the wall in the victim's blood makes it seem as if the murderer wants to frame Jackie, but then why was the pistol thrown overboard?
Does not make sense. If the murderer wishes us to believe that Jacqueline de Belfort was the culprit, why throw the revolver into the river Nile?
They find the gun wrapped in Miss Van Schuyler's velvet stole, which it was fired through to muffle the shot. They arrive at the theory that someone secretly witnessed the shooting scene between Jackie and Simon, picked up the gun, and used it on Lynette. With Jackie and Simon eliminated as suspects, the perpetrator of the crime is most likely the agitator Colonel Race is after, or someone whose family was ruined financially by Lynette's father and carried a grudge, or whoever stole Lynette's pearls. The sleuths can tell that pretty much everyone is holding something back, but who's hiding which secret? All at once, in rapid succession, two more bodies drop. First, Louise is discovered stabbed, along with a torn fragment of money. She had attempted to blackmail the killer. Mrs. Otterbourne claims to have seen Louise's killer, but before she can reveal the name, she's shot by someone using Pennington's revolver. 1978 rearranges the order of events a little bit. For instance, we find out early that Pennington was responsible for the falling boulder, and we're treated to a theoretical scene of each suspect committing the murder, but otherwise it's book accurate. Mostly. Miss Van Schuyler is no longer a kleptomaniac. She has an obsessive love of jewelry, and she returns the pearls herself. There's also the Cobra scene. It's fun, but needless to say, it's film only. 2004 includes the unveiling of Rosalie's hidden layer of character. Beneath her bad temper and sulky attitude, she really is protective of her mother, desperately so, and her mother has grown to hate her for it. We also find out there's a pistol in Rosalie's handbag, though the gun's vanished by the time Poirot searches it. 2022 eliminates the apparent attempt to frame Jackie for murder, which robs us of an important clue. The reason the gun was thrown away was that it had to be, but without any reason to wonder why, we miss this. As with the other Branagh films, Poirot's interrogation technique is all wrong. He's not supposed to poke and irritate suspects into self-disclosure. His style is to gently coax them into lowering their guard. Then all he has to do is listen as they spill their guts. I admit I did like how he deduced that it was Bowers's family who was financially ruined, given her tastes are those of one who's accustomed to wealth. Simon keeps turning up in rooms all over the boat, which bugs me because he's supposed to be so badly injured he can't move from bed. Like, at all. If he can move, then it renders his alibi meaningless. This is especially frustrating in the scene where Poirot interrogates Bouc. Having read the book, I know why Simon has to be present, but with his injury, there has to be a more believable reason than, "This man's my friend. I need a witness to verify my objectivity." I mean, the boat's full of crew members. You can ask one of them! Which brings us to the Bouc subplot, which is 90% film only. While in the book Tim and Rosalie take time to develop feelings for each other, here in the film, Bouc and Rosalie are already not so secretly in love. It turns out Poirot was here originally because Bouc's mother hired him to dig up dirt on Rosalie and her aunt. I don't feel like deep diving into this subplot. Suffice to say, I found it distasteful, hackneyed, and pointless. The end result is that when Bouc found Lynette dead just after the shooting scene, on the spur of the moment, he, like Tim, stole the pearl necklace, which apparently is now a pearl/diamond necklace, and then ditched it when he got cold feet. Still in need of money, when he witnessed Louise's murder, he decided to blackmail the killer. I remember when I first saw this movie in the theater, when this scene started, all of a sudden I realized what was about to happen. Bouc was going to be the third murder victim in place of Mrs. Otterbourne. I was intrigued, and I wanted it to be a good story choice, but the only change it ultimately brings to the story is this moment. Bouc's death works for this kind of story, but this is not the kind of story Death on the Nile was intended to be. They've hammered the "things people will do for love" theme to death, no pun intended, and yes, that is largely the theme of the book, but you can't keep that theme and then make this story about bringing justice to the guilty. All that does is make the story more Poirot-centric, which is not necessary. The book placed him at the center of the tragedy without any of this superfluous embellishment. What really brought the theme home was our empathizing with the one who turned out to be the guilty party. But Jackie is barely in the second half of the film. Before moving on, a few nitpicks that also drive me crazy. No one would wear this jacket in Egypt. Ever. A gun in the turban? Really? And no, not even Poirot would have guessed that, no matter how fashion-savvy he is. Poirot deduces Bouc must have gone to tell Lynette about Simon's leg right away because Bouc commented that he'd send a letter to Louise's ex-fiancée informing him of her death. This is really forced. In the book, before we learn the solution, a few other secrets are revealed. Andrew Pennington pushed over the boulder. Richetti is the agitator Colonel Race is after. It was Cornelia's father who was ruined financially. Ferguson asks Cornelia to marry him, but she turns him down. Miss Van Schuyler backs her until she learns Ferguson's true identity, the wealthy Lord Dawlish. She tries to persuade Cornelia to change her mind, but by then Cornelia has decided to marry Dr. Bessner, to Ferguson's consternation. Tim stole the necklace, but Poirot lets him go after Tim promises to give it back. Mrs. Allerton has been taking care of Rosalie since her mother's death, and Tim and Rosalie become an item, giving Rosalie the non-toxic family she's always needed and deserved. In the novel, we don't actually see Poirot confront the killers with the truth. Poirot explains to Colonel Race, Dr. Bessner, and Cornelia that Jackie and Simon, who are secretly still a couple, planned and carried out Lynette's murder together. They drugged Poirot, staged the shooting, and in the few minutes Simon was left alone, he took the gun and killed Lynette. Then he returned, shot himself in the leg, and chucked the gun overboard. Their plan then was to pretend to reconcile, get married, and live happily ever after on the money Simon had inherited from Lynette. Louise had hinted that she'd seen the killer. Now it's clear that that hint was intended for Simon. He told Jackie, who took care of Louise, then did the same for Mrs. Otterbourne.
It's so dreadfully easy, killing people, Monsieur Poirot. You begin to feel it doesn't matter.
When the boat finally docks, as the passengers come ashore, Jackie kills Simon and then herself, using her second pistol, the twin to her first that she'd temporarily hidden in Rosalie's handbag, then retrieved. Poirot says, "Most great love stories are tragedies," then expresses thanks that there's happiness in the world, meaning Tim and Rosalie. 1978 skips over the smaller revelations and goes straight to the solution. One alteration I noticed was that when Simon tells Jackie in a flashback about Louise's blackmail, it's Jackie who immediately decides Louise has to die.
Can't we pay her?
All our lives?
Jackie, are you sure?
Whereas in the book, it was hinted that Simon made the decision, and Jackie reluctantly went along with it. In fact, you can tell that despite Jackie seeing Simon as a child who means well but needs looking after, Poirot is convinced that Simon is a source of manipulative, corrupting evil. Jackie has only one gun in the film, which I think is a sensible change. At the end, Ferguson and Rosalie, who have developed a relationship, get engaged. Things don't go so well for 2004's Ferguson, though his scenes are really well done. His sequence plays out as it does in the book, as does Tim's, until the moment Rosalie kisses him and he rejects her. Both he and his mother literally shut the door on her, which is a huge WTF moment for anyone who's read the book. Both films capture the poignancy of the culmination of Poirot and Jackie's relationship. He doesn't condemn her for her actions as he condemns Simon, but despite his pity for her, he can't let her go, and she agrees. Jackie is one of the most dynamic characters Christie ever created, intelligent, yet lacking clarity when it comes to Simon. She's done terrible things, but she's not evil. She's glad she won't get the chance to hurt anyone anymore. 2022 has the bare bones of the original ending, and yeah, I know you're probably expecting me to express outrage over Poirot shaving his mustache, and yes, it is cheap and sacrilegious, but honestly, I don't care. The movie's already too far gone for it to matter. What matters is that even though they make brief mention of Jackie's motive, she's still been reduced to a two-dimensional villain. She's too weak a character to carry the theme. Surprisingly, even though it left out a great many elements from the book and added a romance that wasn't there to begin with, 1978 did the best job out of the three of bringing the theme to completion. Love can bring tragedy or joy.